Well, James Montgomery, thank you so much for joining me today. From reading about you before our chat, I don't know if you want to give away your age or anything like that, but you've been doing this for 40 years. So if you want to lie and say you've been doing this since you were like born and say you're 40, you
Well,
can. But up to you.
I actually have. I'm 23 now, so let me subtract your. No, actually, the James Montgomery band is over 50 years old,
Hmm.
and I had a band in college, and I had a band in high school too. So my high school band opened up for Iggy Pop and the MC5, and he was Iggy and the Stooges back then. And then my college band was so successful that when I graduated from college, almost immediately I got a six-figure deal from Capricorn Records, the Allman Brothers record label.
Hmm.
And so I went right from college to touring with the Allman Brothers, Marshall Tucker, Leonard Skinner, and signed a pretty healthy six-figure contract. It didn't begin with the number one, so yes, it's been a while.
Yeah. But that sounds like a lot. Like have you ever really had a break? Because it sounds like it's just been nonstop, like since day one almost.
Well, yeah, but when you consider that what I do for a living is sing and play music, um, I think nonstop is basically what we're looking for.
Hmm. Right. And you're
We don't want to stop. It's the most, in some respects, the most gratifying and fun thing that I do is get on stage and make music with fellow musicians and relate to an audience. And so, as far as we're concerned, 6 nights a week would not be too many. So,
yeah.
and matter of fact, I was looking through this guy's thinking about doing some kind of a documentary on me, and so I was looking. They wanted me to go through like I have these, plastic tubs full of stuff,
Hmm.
and so I came across some touring schedules from the days when from touring schedules from the days we were on the road with the Allman Brothers or Steve Miller or Bruce Springsteen or Aerosmith, whatever. And if there were 30 days in a month, we would work probably 26 of them. And
Right.
that
Yeah.
was, month in and month out, which once you're out there, you want to stay out there. And then if you take time off, then you want time off. But once you're touring, you get into the groove.
Right. Yeah. That's your philosophy. It sounds like just keep going, keep plugging away.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
um, yeah.
I was gonna say, well, Boston seemed to be a launching pad for you because what I understand is you went to Boston University and that's where the band kind of started. So, but your roots were in Detroit, which is obviously so well known for blues and rock and all of that. So, what kind of inclined you to make that jump and go to the East Coast?
Well, yeah, uh, growing up in Detroit, I ran away from home when I was 17 with a 15-year-old girl. That's how desperately I wanted to get out of Detroit. But my brother went to San Francisco. John Lee Hooker and I grew up in Detroit. He went to San Francisco. I went to Boston. That's as far east or west as you can go without swimming. But I really love Detroit. They introduced me every night from Detroit, Michigan, and I'm proud to be from there. It's a fantastic music town. And Detroit musicians, we kind of have this thing where we kind of stick together. For instance, I recorded with Kid Rock and Uncle Cracker, and I was recommended for the job by Steven Tyler. And then when Bob Ritchie, Kid Rock's real name, when Bob found out that I was from Detroit, then he put me on the gig right away. So we Detroit guys and girls, we really think there's something special about the music that comes out of that town. Meanwhile, I wanted to get away from my mom and dad as quickly as possible, and I knew a lot about the Boston music scene because I could get WBZ there. At night in those days, these stations could broadcast at like, hundreds of thousands of watts and stuff. So I was able to get blues shows out of Nashville, the John R. show, and I was able to get rock shows out of Boston. And the jug band that I was in high school, a couple of those guys summered in Martha's Vineyard. So I knew a lot about the Boston music scene, and I was just, I did everything I could to get accepted into a Boston college. And when I got accepted into BU, I was going, this is great. Now I'm going to be in the town. I really wanted to be in Boston specifically.
Mhm. Yeah, and like you mentioned, as soon as you finished, you had a deal lined up for you. So it sounds like you went straight into performing, but were you recording right away as well, or was it strictly just gigs?
Well, when we signed with the label, you know that that meant recording was imminent.
Mm,
We played for about a year. We built up a huge following while I was in college, and when I graduated college, we were probably the most popular band on the college circuit. Even there was even a couple of times an Aerosmith opened for us. But I always loved those guys. So we had a great time working together way back then. So the reason we got signed with Capricorn in those days, you didn't necessarily have to have a hit record. You just had to draw thousands of people every night and have them go crazy.
mm,
And that's what we were doing. We were seeing three to 5,000 people a night, and they were going crazy.
mhm.
And Capricorn said, "Yeah, let's. Why don't you go crazy on? Let people go crazy on our label." And touring with the Allman Brothers was just, they were them and Aerosmith were my favorite bands to tour with. I mean, I think Aerosmith because I knew the guys really well,
Mm.
but and they're a great band. But the Allman Brothers were so friendly. They were so nice, and they would, Greg would let me come into his dressing room and share food and everything with him. There was no attitude at all. They were just a great band to tour. So I was lucky to come out of college and hit the road with the Allman Brothers.
Right, because it sounds like a lot of artists don't really get that experience, especially back then. It sounds like it's pretty competitive from what you're saying, especially in Boston.
Well, yeah, I mean, there were a lot of bands, but there was a lot of people and a lot of music to go around.
Hmm.
It wasn't really. I mean, some of the English bands are good competitive.
Hmm.
They like pull the plug at it. Before you had a chance to do an encore, they'd pull the plug or something like that. And there was a well-known manager who ended up managing Edgar Winter and Johnny Winter, and he would do the same thing. But generally, the music community's always been just people that I think the fact that we share our music every night it makes it so that musicians really are very open to sharing everything. That's why when there's all these tragedies, musicians are sometimes the first ones to come out and volunteer to help people out because that's what we do for a living. We exchange energy with people.
Right, yeah. That just reminded me, you put out like a vaccination song not that long ago during COVID. And that just kind of reminded me of your point that you're saying is, touching on those big life things that people probably should be aware of. Like, was that what the mindset was when you released that track?
Yeah, I thought vaccination was a good idea. My brother didn't want to get a vaccine, and I asked him, John, when was the last time you heard of anyone dying of smallpox? He said, well, not really. And I said, how many of our close friends have died of polio? And he said, well, none that I can think of. And I said, you think that might have been because of a vaccine? I just and I know this is a whole different thing, and I don't want to get into the vaccinated thing anymore because
Right.
I had a lot of people who were really upset that I put the song out, but I really do believe that it cut down drastically on the number of deaths and the people that had really serious COVID and people that had long-term COVID. I think science pretty much will support that.
Mm.
But and I don't care if people get vaccinated or not. I'm not. I think it's a personal decision. But I had actually when I played that song, I had people walk out. Fans get up and walk out. I'm going, hey, come on, lighten up. It's only a song. It's
Right.
just a song. That's all it is.
Yeah, I
But we
guess you
had
have
a great time putting it together. And for those of you watching this, You can go on my YouTube channel and see the whole thing there, the long version and the short version. And the more hits I get on that, the happier I'm going to be. So
Yeah.
get go to my YouTube site and hit on vaccinated.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I feel like you haven't really made it unless you've maybe ruffled a few feathers with your fans here and there. So one can say you've
Yeah,
made it.
exactly. Yeah, you have to get some portion of the population pissed off at you. And then the other thing is you haven't really made it until you've gone through litigation with the manager. That's a prerequisite for calling yourself a rock star. Is that you have to go through litigation. If you haven't been through litigation, excuse me, you don't qualify.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you have any memorable like stories along those lines, like either just playing some gigs or with managers specifically?
Well, the one guy embezzled a couple $100,000 for me, and that's why I ended up in. It took I finally got a forensic accountant, and it took him like 3 months to figure out what the guy was doing. But
Jesus.
anyway, but artists and athletes sometimes when they're managed by somebody unscrupulous, it's not uncommon. I mean, Billy Joel and Tom Petty got it worse than I did.
Mhm.
But anyway, but yeah, you just move on, and there's other people out there, and fortunately for me, I've always had a great fan base, and to this day, we're still doing really good numbers.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, you guys just put out a record, from what I understand, a tribute to Paul Butterfield. What can you tell me about that album?
Well, Paul Butterfield was always one of my biggest influences. I think my two biggest influences on my live show are definitely Paul Butterfield and James Cotton.
Mhm.
And I'm in a documentary about Paul Butterfield, Horn from the Heart, with Bonnie Raitt and Maria Muldaur and Jeff Muldaur and a bunch of people, David Sanborn. And I just produced a documentary about James Cotton that was one of 5 finalists in the Library of Congress Ken Burns Prize for film,
Wow.
which is about as big a film you can get in the documentary without getting an Oscar.
Yeah.
So those guys are my big influences in terms of how I approach music as a performing artist. So this label out in California approached this guy who was Johnny Winter's manager, and I was in the Johnny Winter band for 6 years, and so and said, "You think he would be willing to do an album uh, for Paul Butterfield?" And I said, my bass player David Hall, who's out now with the Joe Perry project.
Mhm.
Um, we'd been wanting to make an album for Paul Butterfield for like years, and so when this label said, "Hey, we'll give you money to make one," we said, "Yeah." So we rearranged a lot of the stuff. Paul was like a huge innovator and a guy who loved to experiment. So we're hoping it didn't turn over in your grave on this one, but so we rearranged a bunch of stuff and he had original stuff on his record and he didn't sing all the songs on his record. So we just modeled everything after Paul Butterfield. And he always usually had an instrumental on his first couple of records. So the amazing Grace Kelly, the unbelievable saxophonist who Wynton Marsalis calls the future of jazz. She and I wrote a song with my guitar player, so we had that instrumental on there. And we have Jimmy Vivino on there, who was the music director of Conan O'Brien Band, and of course he's played with everybody. And we had Paul Nelson on there from the Johnny Winter Band, and the Uptown Horns, who were the Rolling Stones touring horn section. And they're also the horn section on James Brown's "Living in America." I think the only white people ever recorded with James Brown. He came in the studio, looked at the horns, and who are those guys? He said, "Well, they're the guys that did the horn charts that you like so much." James Brown looks at Maceo, he looks at the Uptown Horns, looks at Maceo, looks at it, he says, "I guess my music touches all kinds of people." He couldn't believe that white people. He couldn't believe that white people could love his music and learn how to play it.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, just even now, just listening to you list off all of these artists and musicians that you've worked with, like, how do you even maintain these relationships with all these people, especially with a career as long as yours and everything that you've ventured into, how do you, kind of work on maintaining those relationships with people that you just like working with?
Well, we do the best we can. Out here in New England, there's a lot of New England-based musicians
Mm,
that we play together all the time. The Uptown Horns, Christine Ullman from Saturday Night Live, John Cafferty, John Butcher, Barry Goudreau, former guitar player from Boston, and the list goes on and on. And Johnny A. And we New England people get together as often as we can for like usually like what we call a super band for charity.
mm,
We do about 5 or 6 of those a year. Otherwise, it's just really a question of trying to just stay in touch with people. And I mean, over the years, I did a movie with Morgan Freeman. I stayed in touch with him for a while, and met Arthur Miller, the great playwright, and tried to stay in touch with him. But I still stay in touch with Huey Lewis and Jim Belushi and the Blues Brothers. So and the guys from Aerosmith, we stay in touch. So you try and stay in touch with as many people as you can, because here again, we all are cut from the same cloth. We love to share music and love to share our lives, actually.
yeah, and essentially that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Like you're coming together to share what you love and what you've been doing for so long.
It is, and what happens on a good night, on nights when things are going great and the band's really playing and you're playing solos and you don't know where they're coming from. Those are the nights that the music plays you.
Mm,
You kind of lose, and that's the beauty of it, is that you lose your limited egoic self, and then you tap into what they would call your source energy or chi or soul,
mm,
whatever you want to call it. Call it what you want. I call it messing with a kid, but so yeah, so you're actually able to tap into that energy, and like I say, it plays you eventually. I had a harmonica solo that I did, which I think to this day is one of the best solos I've ever played.
mhm.
Um, I can't play it anymore because I have it on a cassette, and I don't know how to play a cassette anymore. They don't. You got to go to a third-hand show in Hoboken to find a cassette machine.
Right.
But but um, but I backed that cassette up back and forth probably 50 times trying to figure out how to play the solo that I played that was taped there, and I could never figure out how I played it. So that's why I know that when things are really smoking, all of a sudden this kind of the creative principle of the universe takes over, and you just kind of tap into that and go.
Right. Yeah. Do you have any in the New England area specifically? Are there any venues or any gigs or shows that really stand out to you, like places you like to perform?
Yeah, it's such a people sometimes ask, well, do you like playing in the smaller places or the bigger places? It just depends on that particular night and your relationship to that particular audience.
Hmm.
One of the first shows I did with the Allman Brothers, we were seeing, I think there are 175,000 people. And when you're on stage looking at 175,000 people, that's all you can see. You can't see anything except people. No matter, you look all this way, and you look all that way, and you look all that way, and the only thing you see is people. Now, that crowd went crazy, 175 people, even though the Allman Brothers were flying in helicopters over us, and the audience knew they were there. We still got two encores,
Right.
and they were having a great time. And then you'll play some nightclub somewhere, and then some weirdo corner of the world, and you can't get 100 people to give you the kind of energy back that you're looking for, but which is extremely rare, by the way. I don't want people to think that. I mean, every time we play, we go over big, but so it's not so much the venue as the audience, but there are great venues in New England, where I spend most of my time, and now all over the country.
Hmm.
Listening rooms. in New England, Tupelo Music Hall, the Cape Theater. Jonathan's up in Maine. I'm actually playing a place called Hobbs on Friday the 24th, which is a great venue. I can't wait to play there. The Emmeline Theater in Mamaroneck, um, New York. I'm there at the end of the month. That's another great place. The Bull Run in Shirley on the 1st of April. There's all the rooms we play now. We don't really play any nightclubs anymore. We either play like concerts or big listening rooms, or in the case of Bull Run, kind of a dinner theater type place.
Mhm.
And but they're scattered all throughout New England. Flying Monkey, just really great rooms.
Yeah. And you touched upon a
But
couple
the
of those.
24th in Ossipee, New Hampshire,
I was gonna
and
say,
yeah, and Emmeline, Mamaroneck, New York. Anyway,
yeah, I was gonna say you touched upon a few of the shows that I wanted to bring up. Yeah, especially in Massachusetts, like you said, Shirley. You got one in Marblehead, Dalton, Newton, Arlington, Amherst a little bit later. And like you said, throughout New England, you're gonna do some stops. What can people expect from these shows that you have coming up? Is it gonna be a lot of stuff off the new record? Is it gonna be like, a kind of tribute to things you've done in the past, or a little bit of everything?
well, yeah, it is a little bit of everything, but my as I kind of alluded to earlier, talking about James Cotton and Paul Butterfield, um, you know, my band has always been a very high energy band,
Mhm.
and you know, I'm in my 70s now, but my energy on stage is the same as it's always been. The same with the guys in the band. We come to kick ass and take no prisoners, and that's what we do. And my bass player David Hall was with the Buddy Miles band when he was 17. He's always with the Joe Perry project. He's going out with Joe Perry again this month in April. And then he actually did 4 shows as a substitute bass player for Aerosmith
Mhm.
as their bass player. My guitar player did a brief tour with the Blues Brothers, but of course I've been a Blues Brother since Danny turned 30. So I've been a member of the touring Blues Brothers on several occasions.
Mhm.
And then my drummer was 5 years with the Jay Giles band. So these are all high energy bands. No wimps allowed. And then if I bring a horn player, I'll bring in Andrew Clark from the Beach Boys or Derek Dyer from Tina Turner. So every position on stage is filled by a major performer.
Right. And it sounds like, you're going to come to your show and it's going to be nothing less than high energy and spectacular because, like you
Yeah,
said,
yeah, but to really make a high energy show, you have to have times when you come when the dynamic is way low too. Otherwise, it's just you lose that energy if it's just full tilt all the time. Except for my good friends, the Ramones, who were very effective at that. Every single Ramones record release party in Boston happened in my apartment, by the way. But and I love them, but they're the only guys I know who can just play every song full tilt.
mhm,
Or new, I should say, because only Marky's left. But yeah, so it'll be high energy. We'll be playing some songs dedicated to Paul Butterfield. We usually start the set with that. And then we mix in some originals, and we've got old favorites. The songs like the Train song, which was the #1 song played on WBCN for a little bit.
mhm.
And so we get requests for older songs, schooling them dice. So we'll be playing some of that stuff too.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And like you said, you've built up a nice fan base over these years. So I'm sure they're just as excited to hear it as you are to play it.
Yeah, it's some of my absolute very best friends in life are people that I know just because they started out being in the audience so often.
Mm,
And that's another great thing about what we do for a living is that you have this ever widening family, and your family grows every year. And some of my very closest personal friends people that I know just because, Ron and Sandy, if you're listening, just because just because they come to see us so often, and now they come to my house and visit. I go to their house and visit. It's we've always had tremendous respect for our fans. I'm always puzzled when people like won't sign an autograph or do that kind of thing. Although it's always circumstantial.
Hmm.
Sometimes something's happening where that won't happen, but we have great respect and admiration for our fans. We really do.
Hmm. No, that's great. Well, one of the final questions I want to ask you, James, is, looking back at everything you've done and everything that you've put out in your career at this point, what would you say that blues means to you specifically, or just music and rock in general? What do you think you've learned from everything about yourself through your career?
Well, I had a radio show for about 5.5 years until I joined Johnny Winter's band, and then I couldn't maintain it. Um, so I interviewed probably 100 blues musicians. My manager said, "You should get a radio show." And the very next day, I'm walking down the street, and this guy says, "Hey, we had a meeting. We want you to do a radio show." So I think I called up Bonnie Raitt, and I called up John Lee Hooker and James Cotton and Greg Allman. And I asked them if I had a show, would you come on? And they all said yes. So the next day I said, yeah, I'll do a show, because my show was it wasn't spinning records so much. It was each show was dedicated to a musician
Hmm.
and then their influences. So the reason I bring this up is because almost every single musician of the 100, we all had a moment when we heard blues and it struck this really deep chord where you just said, wow, listen to that. That's what I want to do. I don't know if that happens with rock and roll people. I think maybe they want to play guitar, maybe they want to be in a band. I don't know if they have this moment that's just like this really visceral, deep-seated moment. Bonnie Raitt had it at a campfire when the counselors started playing a Tom Rush version of a Bo Diddley song. So we all have that moment, that moment where it's clear that you just really want to play that music. Blues is like that, and so the idea is to keep getting back to that place, and then you blues music is tailor made for people who are um, going through hard times, or to get to that place where you go, wow, I really love that. It's cathartic. It's the Aristotelian cathartic principle. When Aristotle and Plato had the argumentative differences about the nature of the universe. But anyway, um, so blues is a very cathartic form of music that aims to really unite unite your feeling with someone else's, and it's cyclical. It goes through periods of where it's more popular than others, but it'll always be here. There'll always be young people coming to blues and older people sticking with it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, James. I appreciate that. And thank you so much for coming on. Before I let you go and we wrap this up, why don't you let people know where they can keep up with you or get info about your upcoming shows and things like that?
Yeah, we've got. I'm up in Ossipee, New Hampshire, Friday the 24th with an all-star band at this place called Hobbs Brewery, which is really one of the most fun places you can go to. It's a lot of dancing, a big place, really great brew house and food. And then I'm going to be at the Emmeline Theater in Mamaroneck, New York on the 31st. My first time in there, and it used to be an area where we had a huge fan base. So I'm hoping a lot of my old fans come out for that one. And then on the first, we're in Shirley, Massachusetts at the Bull Run,
Mhm.
which is a great, and I heard that one's almost sold out. So you better buy tickets fast. Um, but they have really good food. You sit down, have a nice dinner, watch the band. And that place, the audience is right in front of you at that place, so it's like really intimate. And it's the kind of audience that if you play a great solo, they let you know. So there's a lot of interaction at that place. And then I'll be out in Amherst at a place called the Drake, which is right in Amherst. I'll be in Dalton, Mass, at a place called the Knitting Factory, I think it is, or something like that, stationery factory.
Mhm.
And then and then my website, it took me years to come up with this, but my website is jamesmontgomery.com. Why is my head so flat? I just don't know. But yeah, so they can get on the site and see all the dates, and just people should know that they're going to see an energetic show played by some of the best musicians on the planet. Everybody I have in my band has played with some of the biggest bands in the country.
Mhm. So yeah, people should get those tickets fast.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, James, for coming on again. I really appreciate it.